Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, July 25th, 2025, and yesterday we got word that incumbent Governor Tony Evers of the state of Wisconsin will now choose not to run for a third term ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. Now, this is one of the first major retirements we are hearing, especially of an incumbent governor who has long floated the idea that they might run for another term in this upcoming midterm cycle. It would be pretty good news for Democrats if he had decided to run. He holds a pretty steady approval rating. He had won his last election against the odds, and 2026 is likely going to be a very favorable year to the Democratic Party. But now with this announcement recently, the Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez has already entered into the 2026 governor's race, as many other members of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin have also moved and taken steps towards a potential governor's bid in the 2026 race. Of those who have already said thus far that they are openly exploring the idea of running for governor, you have David Crowley, the Milwaukee County Executive. You have the mayor of Milwaukee, that if David Crowley decides not to run, Cavalier Johnson will run. You have Mandela Barnes, who was the 2022 nominee for Senate and served as lieutenant governor under Tony Evers in the first term. You have Kelda Roys, a state senator who ran for Congress and ran for governor, now looking to run yet again. And potentially speaking to Sarah Godlewski, who was the Wisconsin Secretary of State and is still in that position, who was appointed and now will have a real election in 2026, the first real one in terms of that race, ran for Senate in 22. We recognize her name. The Attorney General might run. A lot of people might run in this race, and it is already starting to really build out. These announcements are coming in at record pace. It was actually quite interesting to see. Tony Evers had never really confirmed that he wasn't going to run for governor again. He had hinted towards it because he had not yet announced anything, as well as the fact that it is a third term. It actually is quite rare in many cases for people to run for a third term, and it actually would be interesting too, because now there is, on the Republican side, a very open flirtation with Scott Walker, who served as governor, the 45th governor, floating the idea of trying to run as the 47th governor. He tried to compare himself to Donald Trump, being 45 and 47. Who knows if he's just messing around here, but he certainly has expressed interest in running again. And so 2026, I think, will be a very interesting year, especially given just the sheer amount of Democrats that have already come out and said, one, I'm going to run, or I'm openly exploring the possibility of running. This is going to be a race for the ages. And I think a big reason for that is because Wisconsin will come into center focus as a state the Democrats very much need to win in 2026. Well, Democrats got very lucky. In 2022, they were able to win on the same ballot that Republican Senator Ron Johnson was winning re-election on against the incumbent Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. But Tony Evers defeated Tim Michels by a margin of about 3.4% across the state of Wisconsin. But then 2 years later, Wisconsin voted for Donald Trump by a margin of roughly 1 percentage point. It was a pretty significant bump in favor of the GOP from election to election, especially given that Biden had won it in 2020 and Democrats did very well in 2018 in Wisconsin. Now, 2018 also happens to be the last time the Republicans held the governorship in Wisconsin. Scott Walker was also running for a third term, decided to do it then. He was first elected in 2010. A recall effort went through, didn't end up happening. By 2014, we saw Scott Walker win yet again by a margin of roughly 6 points. I mean, he was on track for a pretty good victory, at least in 2018, if he was able to maintain his approval rating. Despite 2018 being a very good year for the Democratic Party, Walker actually was a pretty formidable opponent. But by the time we got there, Tony Evers ended up winning by 1.1%. 4 years later, again, like I said, we saw Tony Evers win by about 3.4%. Pretty impressive, to say the least. But this race, I think, will be interesting because a lot of people will want to run the lieutenant governor, the former lieutenant governor, members of the Milwaukee delegation, whether the county executive or the mayor, and a lot of other candidates too, who very much seem to be open with the idea of running and have not declined after being asked by the press, will you run, will you not run? It looks like right now this race could be one of the most contested Democratic primaries in the state of Wisconsin. And so it really is very interesting. I think 2026 has shaped up to be quite a fascinating year for Democratic primaries in a way that arguably 2018 just quite frankly wasn't. In 2018, a lot of it was repeat incumbency status. It was more of the status quo in terms of what style of Democratic pushback people saw, and it was that age-old debate between centrists and progressives rather than what we are starting to see today as whether or not someone is a fighter or not, a fighter or folder, whether or not someone is fighting against Donald Trump in the best way that they can, or they're allowing Donald Trump to walk all over them. And we're starting to see that really pan out. We saw that with Mamdani in the city of New York. We're seeing it now with challengers in the Connecticut governor's race, with challengers in the Hawaii 1st Congressional District. I mean, we are seeing it across the board. Wisconsin, there won't be an incumbent to challenge, but there will be a status quo to challenge, certainly. There will be a question of how Wisconsin has been done and whether or not Democrats are on board with that. A lot of Democrats are very happy with Tony Evers, don't get me wrong. There was a case to be made that he would have been able to have a very easy re-election into a third term. But since Tony Evers won't be the one on the ballot, this is a new opportunity, seemingly so, for Democrats to find leadership that might envision a Wisconsin in a slightly different manner. While a lot of Democrats, again, are very happy with the way Tony Evers ran this, people also can still look for new leadership and hope for an expansion on what they've liked under current leadership. And that's where it might be interesting to see exactly how someone like the incumbent lieutenant governor actually fares against the general voters. You see, looking at the list of candidates here, a lot of them might drop down to run for lieutenant governor, but no major endorsements have been made. You know, just minutes after Joe Biden dropped out of the 2024 presidential election, he followed it up by endorsing his vice president, Kamala Harris, who went on to win the nomination and go towards the general election as the Democratic nominee. We aren't seeing the same exact thing with Tony Evers, but it actually is quite rare that the incumbent governor makes an immediate endorsement. Usually it takes a while, and because this was dropped yesterday, I'm sure, Sarah Rodriguez absolutely knew about it. You can see that her announcement video was actually uploaded on YouTube 8 days ago, so she must have been given at least a week heads up. But the point is, now that it is all public, a lot of the major names are starting looking through, should they run, should they not run, could they win, would they win? A lot of questions they might be asking themselves, and it will be a quite fascinating Democratic primary as a lot of top names across a very competitive state come center focus and actually debate against one another and face off in a very, very contentious election. Now, this opens up the idea that a Republican could actually do better in 2026 depending on who Democrats nominate. Whenever there's a retiring incumbent who is popular, it often is looked at as something that might open up the opportunity for the opposition party to do well. When you saw candidates in the past, especially governor candidates, who have gone from races where, yes, they might be the popular Democrat or the popular Republican, if the state wants new leadership, they will vote for it. We've seen it happen time and time again, and it actually happened what we saw with Scott Walker, right? He was popular for a while. Tony Evers was able to get the upper hand, and eventually he was no longer popular. Voters voted him out. But now, if there's a possibility that voters might want him back, something to that degree, I mean, we'll see what happens. Who knows? But my ultimate take here is that Wisconsin is going to be a race that will be, quite competitive. No matter who Democrats nominate, there will be an upper hand on the Democratic side simply by the nature of what 2026 is going to be. But it is still going to be competitive. Even in 2018, when Democrats in the Senate race were outpacing, Leah Vukmir by a margin of 10 points. Can't believe I remember that. That was a race I covered a long time ago. Tammy Baldwin easily won re-election. Now, she won her re-election in 2024, but again, by 0.9%, except for, and not what it was in 2018, which was an 11-point margin. Massive, massive differences between the two, and I think that makes a difference in 2026. And so I think a lot of Democrats will come off Wisconsin very reflective, looking at these races, looking at how they've developed, looking at who's running, who's not running, who's going to be the strongest candidate, because there will be a lot of questions that need to be answered about how do you keep this state safe for the Democratic Party. Because as they discuss redistricting, as they discuss state legislative boundaries in 2030 when the census was redrawn, as they discuss a bunch of different things, Democrats need a strong candidate. Chances are they'll get one, but the margin and the question to the degree at which they will win by will be answered over the coming months. As we start to see frontrunners emerge, as we start to see endorsements reel in, because it is early on, right? I mean, this is a quite early announcement to retire, and what it means is there's a lot of room for growth on every side of the Democratic and Republican Party to come closer to winning the election, to come closer to winning the primary, whatever it might be. There is time. There certainly is no absence of it. But 2026 is already shaping up to be a very different type of midterm year than 2018. And while the eventual results of Democrats winning the House but losing the Senate, but doing well in governorships might be the reality we reach by 2026, the primary process will look dramatically different. Everything else will look dramatically different. The energy and the aura and the, vibes around the Democratic Party will be entirely different than it was in 2018, and this primary might be a great place to look as one of the first true open primaries we have seen this cycle, and one with a retiring popular Democrat who Democrats, in theory, should have no problem at winning the election in November of 2026. But it all comes down to who they nominate, who Republicans nominate, what the race looks like, how they run these campaigns, and we can learn a lot about the state of the Democratic Party, the state of the race in Wisconsin, and what it might look like in just about a year and a half. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 governor election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today. Sorry, tomorrow.